The robot started with the base plate, to which I added motors and wheels to propel it. I theorized that there would be a lot of weight on the plate, so I added clutches and gears to transform speed into torque. I added a swivel wheel towards the back of the plate, that way the rear of the robot didn't drag on the ground, and later mounted my Arduino to the rear of the robot. I knew it would need to follow a path, so I added 3 line trackers to detect where the path was. I also knew that it would need to find the distance of cans from the robot, so I added an ultrasonic sensor to detect that. I decided to use a crane to try to pick up the cans from above, so I needed to rotate it, and I did so using a rotating ring and a motor on the side, so that was geared as well. I determined the location of the jib, the horizontal bar that the claw hangs from, using a potentiometer. I altered the height of the claw by using a winding drum with a motor attached. By winding up the rope some more, I could raise the claw, and by unwinding the rope, I could lower the claw. I prevented over travel in either direction, but lowering the claw too much, thus getting too much slack, or raising the claw too much so it was too tight and thus damaging the motor, by using 2 limit switches. I had one attached to the jib, pointing down, and to actuate upon contact with the top of the claw, and it would generally hit the gear, telling it to stop retracting the cable and rising it, and one attached to the bottom of the claw that would actuate when it would either hit the ground or would hit the base plate. Right? That would tell it to stop lowering the claw, that way there was no slack in the line. Right? One of the issues encountered with raising and lowering the claw was that every time it wasn't at one of the 2 limits, the claw would rotate slightly due to being unbalanced. This was an issue for 2 reasons. The first issue was that every so often the upper half of the claw would rotate so that it would not hit the upper limit switch, and ran the chance of damaging the motor because it never got the message to stop. The other issue came with can retrieval and can sorting. Every time that the can would go and it would rotate, the can would be just off enough from where it was in the last time that I would have to be changing the values for dropping the can's position every single time. In the end, I ended up putting 2 stabilizers on to either side of it and securing them and running it back up to the main support or beam as if it was a power digger or a power shovel. I opened and closed my claw with my 5th and last motor. I used a bevel gear because the motor was mounted with the axle horizontal, and I needed to close the claw with a vertical axle. So I used 2 bevel gears to make the claw vertical, and then I went from a small gear to a large gear due to the small amount of travel needed for the claw arm to close and to open. I prevented it from over-traveling in one direction, opening, by having a push button as a limit switch. That way it would stop when the push button got actuated, and merely used a timer to to close it. That way it would close on the can. I used a line tracker and the claw itself to determine what the color the can picked up was, and would tell it to put it in the sloped ramp attached towards the back behind my wheels on the right or the left, depending on what color my can was. The right side of the robot was for the white pieces, and the left side of the robot was for the black pieces. I decided this because the white pieces register lower on the number on the line tracker, and the right side had the lower number on the potentiometer, while the black side cans detected higher on the line tracker, and my left side was higher on the potentiometer for my lane positioning. I had it sloping downward towards the floor, that way the cans would slide towards the end of it. I prevented the can from sliding out of it by using elbows at either side of the end, and used the elbows to mount them to the sides of the base plate, and attempted to prevent the cans from falling sideways out by using a single strip of metal running from the lower end of the ramp all the way up to the side of the Arduino. There's also a servo mounted underneath the base plate, pointing upward, or attached to an arm. The arm was later removed because it was easier to drop the cans directly into the bins than have the cans drop onto the base plate and have the arms knock them into the bins, which was the original plan. And the servo was left in, which might have caused issues later in the final run-through. Some of the other issues I had were with the ultrasonic sensor and the can's position, and that if I didn't have the can position just right, not in front of it but along the perpendicular axis, it would have difficulty detecting how far away it was. Another issue I had to do with the crane. As it was rotating due to the momentum of the weight of the claw as well as the weight of the jib, it would sometimes swing over after it would stop. This caused me to end up having to put a delay into the stopping program before it dropped, in order to make sure that it was in the correct location before I dropped it. Another issue that I had was that my wires for the ones that ran that way, which ended up being the most of my limiting wires, as well as the wire for my armature, and it would end up coming loose and popping out. For this point, I have my coding set up that way the can will be picked up and then cycled around to its proper pin. In this case, it's going over to the right side. And it will not drop because I did not get to do that section. The black can will drop because this one was recorded much later and it got dropped then. It will now retract and awkwardly retract, and as you look in the lower right corner, it will show it dropping just then. This is an attempt at showing the final run-through, which I switched out for which loop because I had an issue with my functions, and even then my tracking was now iffy than it used to be, which confused me. And that right there was the fact that my high-sense limiter did not actually end up working because it swung out of position. And at the moment, I think there was a delay in there, and if you look at that, that's just me doing a couple minutes of black space trying to figure out if there was a loose wire. And now it's going to turn around and go to the correct location. And that's me just double checking my wires again. And now my white can has dropped. And now it's restarted. After this, it went into a couple different directions, but ran. And here, there were a couple loose wires that I ended up stopping before I showed it off. I do know that there were issues combining the two because as the robot essentially went off in circles a couple times, like there was a delay in the program, even though there wasn't. But I do know that the individual sections were good because the line tracking section was built based off of the previous line tracking project using the Objective 2 code, and I ended up working on the sorting section separately from everything else, and I think that's where the issue is coming in, if not the servo, as earlier mentioned.